Millionaire tests his wife by pretending to lose his fortune and is shocked by her reaction. The clock struck 6 in the morning when Richard Harrington woke up in a cold sweat. The same nightmare, always the same. Beatrice, his first wife, packing her bags while he begged on his knees. "I married a winner, not a loser," she said, dragging the last suitcase down the marble hallway that would soon no longer be his. 10 years had passed since that day. 10 years since Richard, at 35, watched his first real estate development company sink during an economic downturn. Just 3 months of hardship were enough for Beatrice to file for divorce and marry a rival businessman. 3 months for Richard to learn that, for some people, love and money were inseparable. He glanced to his side. Helen slept peacefully, her brown hair splayed across the Egyptian cotton pillow. His wife, his second chance. Or would it be his second disappointment? "Good morning, love," Helen murmured, opening her eyes and smiling. That smile that had won Richard over on an August night 3 years ago, at a classical music concert where she played piano. No flashy dresses or showy jewelry. Just a simple black dress and fingers that danced across the keys as if conversing with Chopin. "Good morning," Richard replied, kissing her forehead. But he couldn't shake the voice of Patricia, his sister, who had planted another seed of doubt during yesterday's lunch. "Rick, have you ever thought about what would happen if you lost everything again? Would Helen stick around?" Richard got up and went to the balcony of the penthouse apartment. Below, New York City was waking up. His empire was waking up with it. For development firms, 12 projects underway, net worth estimated at $200 million. He'd rebuilt it all, brick by brick, deal by deal, turning humiliation into fuel. But the fear lingered, like a parasite feeding on every affectionate gesture from Helen, every whispered, "I love you," every moment when she seemed perfectly content living in the world of luxury that Richard had built. "Coffee?" Helen appeared behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "Sure." Richard turned, studying his wife's face. At 38, she maintained a natural beauty without cosmetic procedures. She insisted on that, even when Richard offered to pay for anything she wanted. "I like aging," she'd say, laughing. "These are marks of stories lived." Stories. Richard had hired a private investigator in the first 6 months of dating. He wasn't proud of it, but he needed to know. The report showed that Helen single-handedly supported her mother with Alzheimer's, had turned down his offers of financial help 3 times, and lived in a 400-square-foot apartment in Brooklyn. No suspicious debts, no rich ex-boyfriends, no pattern of gold-digging behavior. But Beatrice had been convincing at the start, too. "You're quiet today," Helen commented as she brewed coffee. She insisted on doing it herself, even with 2 house staff. "Something bothering you?"
Vok, Richard Lied.
"Some complicated contracts. Want to talk about it?" "I don't want to bore you." Helen paused, the mug hovering in the air. "Richard, you never bore me. I'm your wife, remember? Your worries are my worries." Were they really? The question echoed in Richard's mind like a death knell. That night, during a dinner at Patricia's house, the seed of doubt found fertile ground. His sister, a successful lawyer and perpetually single, poured expensive wine while firing subtle barbs. "Helen, dear, don't you find it boring not working?" Patricia asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I do work," Helen replied calmly. "I give volunteer music lessons to underprivileged kids 3 times a week." "Oh yes, volunteer work. How noble." Patricia's tone dripped with condescension. "But you must miss that financial independence from when you were a public school teacher, right?" Richard saw Helen stiffen slightly. "I have all the independence I need, Patricia. Richard never holds me back from anything." "Of course not. My brother is too generous, actually. Sometimes generous to a fault, I'd say." The dinner dragged on tensely. On the drive back, Richard drove in silence. Helen touched his hand. "Your sister doesn't like me. She's protective. She thinks I'm with you for the money." Richard didn't respond. The lack of denial hung heavy between them like lead. "Richard," Helen turned in her seat, "I married you because I love you, Not for the penthouse, not for the cars, not for the trips. For you. I know, he murmured. But did he really? The next day, something happened that turned Richard's paranoia into obsession. Arriving home early, he overheard Helen talking on the phone with her best friend, Carla. I can't take this empty routine anymore, Helen said, pacing the living room. Dinners at fancy restaurants, superficial chats with people who only care how much you're worth. Sometimes I miss that simple life. You know? Coming home exhausted after a day of teaching and being genuinely happy with a bowl of ramen. Richard froze behind the door. I love Richard, that hasn't changed. But this luxury life, it doesn't fulfill me, Carla. I feel like a porcelain doll on a golden shelf. The conversation continued, but Richard heard nothing more. Blood pounded in his ears. She was unhappy. She missed the simple life. And if the money ran out, would she be happy again? The question was obscene, but it grew like a tumor. That sleepless early morning, Richard made a decision. He needed to know. He needed concrete proof. He needed to find out if Helen truly loved him or if she was just a better actress than Beatrice. He called Matthew, his partner and lawyer, at 3 a.m. I need your help with something delicate. Richard, it's 3 in the morning. I need to test Helen. Silence on the other end. Then, have you lost your mind? Maybe, but I need to know, Matthew. I need to know if she'd stay with me if I lost everything. And how do you plan to do that without actually losing everything? Richard smiled into the darkness. A joyless smile. You're a lawyer. Whip up fake lawsuits, convincing documents, planted stories in the press. Will make her believe I'm ruined. Completely ruined. This is insane. It's necessary. Matthew sighed. If you're real, LY set on this, it has to be airtight. She can't find out. It will be. And if she passes the test, then I'll know true love exists. And if she fails? Richard hung up without answering. He didn't want to think about that possibility. Not yet. What would you do if you loved someone but couldn't fully trust them? Is it fair to test that love? Or are some acts of distrust unforgivable from the start? 2 weeks later, everything was set. Matthew had lined up contacts, forged documents, bribed niche journalists. Richard had authorized obscene spending to make the hoax perfect. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was using his fortune to pretend he had no fortune. The trap began on a rainy Tuesday. Richard came home at noon, his face a carefully rehearsed mask of despair. Helen was in the living room reading. Richard, are you okay? Why are you home so early? He let his briefcase drop to the floor. Helen, we need to talk. She stood up immediately, genuine concern in her eyes. Or was it acting too? What happened? We're under investigation. The IRS, lawsuits, all at once. He sank heavily onto the couch. Someone forged documents, planted fake evidence. They're accusing me of tax fraud, money laundering. That's ridiculous. You would never do something like that. I know that, you know that, but they don't. Or they don't care. Richard covered his face with his hands. My accounts are frozen. All assets locked down. Helen, we could lose everything. The silence that followed lasted eternities. Richard watched Helen through his fingers, cataloging every reaction. She was pale, her hands trembling slightly. But what did that mean? Fear of losing comfort or fear for her husband? Then Helen did something unexpected. She knelt in front of him, holding his hands. We'll get through this together, she said with a firm voice. You're not alone. Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Guilt? Hope? Helen, do you understand what this means? We could lose the penthouse, the cars, everything. We might even go to jail if... Jail? Richard, you're innocent. Being innocent doesn't guarantee anything when you have powerful enemies. Helen hugged her husband tightly. Then we'll fight. We'll prove your innocence. We'll sell what we need to pay lawyers, take out loans. There's nothing to sell. It's all frozen. And no one's lending money to a businessman under investigation. He felt Helen's tears wetting his shirt. Were they real? In the days that followed, the hoax deepened. Hired actors posed as federal agents, arriving with papers to appraise assets. Helen watched, mortified, as suited men measured paintings, photographed furniture, listed every valuable item. "It's humiliating," she whispered to Richard that night. "How can they treat you like this?" "It's procedure," Richard replied, hating every word of the lie. "Tomorrow the IRS comes. They'll seal off some rooms." "Seal? Our home. It isn't ours anymore, Helen. Maybe it never will be again." She didn't sleep that night. Richard pretended to sleep but watched through half-closed eyelids as Helen cried silently in the bathroom. For him or for the luxurious life slipping away. Niche media outlets published the planted stories. Harrington Empire under scrutiny. Fraud or witch hunt? Social media comments were vicious. Old friends started ghosting. Invites to social events dried up. Patricia called, following the scripted plan. Richard put it on speaker for Helen to hear. "Richard, I can't get involved in this." Patricia's voice was perfectly pitched between pity and self-preservation. "My professional reputation. You understand, right? Until this blows over, it's best we keep our distance. You're my sister, and that's why I'm being honest. Any association with me now could hurt your case. Sorry, Rick. We'll talk when it's over." She hung up. Richard looked at Helen, expecting satisfaction. After all, she'd never gotten along with Patricia. Instead, he saw compassion. "She's scared," Helen said softly. "People do terrible things when they're scared." The defense of his sister caught Richard off guard. The same Patricia who'd treated her with disdain had been forgiven with disarming ease. The final staged blow came a week later. Matthew arrived at the penthouse with a funeral face. "Richard, Helen, bad news. The judge approved the full asset freeze. You have 72 hours to vacate this property. It'll be auctioned to cover potential debts." Helen went pale. "Vacate? Where will we go?" "I have a buddy with a vacant apartment in Brooklyn," Matthew said, sticking to the script. 2 bedrooms, basic. "It's what I can offer right now." "Brooklyn," Helen repeated. There was no disdain in her voice, just shock. That night, she started packing. Richard watched, pretending to pack his own things while cataloging her every reaction. Helen took a few designer dresses, leaving most in the closet. She packed photos, books, some sheet music. No flashy jewelry, no expensive shoes. "Aren't you taking more stuff?" Richard asked. "I won't need gala gowns in a Brooklyn apartment, love. I need practical clothes now." Practical. The word echoed in Richard's mind. Was she adapting too quickly? Or did she genuinely not care about the luxuries? The move happened on a rainy Thursday. The Brooklyn apartment was 500 square feet, with a leaky wall and windows that didn't seal right. The contrast to the 3,000 square foot Manhattan penthouse was brutal. Helen walked in, looked around and said, "I'll need new curtains. These are moldy." Then she started unpacking. No drama, no tears, no accusations. Richard didn't know if it reassured him or terrified him. Matthew pulled Richard into the hallway. "You sure about this? We can still stop." "I'm just getting started. She's handling it too well. You notice?" "I do. Too good to be true, maybe. Or she really loves you. We'll see if that love survives what's next." The next phase was designed to break anyone. Total financial strangulation. Richard left only one joint account active with $20,000. The last chance money, as Matthew called it. It was the perfect bait. If Helen was motivated by greed, she'd dip into it eventually. The first week in the modest apartment was revealing. Helen woke early, made coffee in an old percolator she found in a cabinet. No sprays. So machine, no fancy pods. Just cheap ground coffee and a cloth filter. "I didn't know you knew how to use that stuff," Richard commented. "I learned as a kid. My grandma made the best percolator coffee." She smiled nostalgically. "Funny how you forget these things when everything's too easy." She cleaned the apartment herself. Cooked simple meals, rice, beans, chicken. Nothing like the elaborate dinners the private chef whipped up in the penthouse. And not once did she complain. At night, After Richard pretended to sleep, she cried in the shower. But during the day, she kept a brave smile, massaged his tense shoulders, offered words of encouragement. Was it acting or true love? 2 weeks later, Helen did something that completely blindsided Richard. He came home, still getting used to calling that shoebox home, and found several pieces of jewelry spread out on the table. The emeralds he'd given her for her birthday, the diamond necklace from their wedding, the sapphire earrings. "What's this?" he asked, feigning confusion. "I'm selling them." Helen's voice was steady. "I looked it up online. I can get about $40,000. It's enough to hire a better lawyer, maybe even a private investigator to dig into who set you up." Richard felt the floor drop out from under him. "Helen, no. Those gifts are yours. They're just things, Richard. Pretty rocks that mean nothing when the man I love is suffering." She cupped his face in her hands. "You are worth more than any jewel in this world." Matthew, who was monitoring every move, called Richard the next day. She actually sold them, all the jewelry, got $36,000, deposited it in her account, and already contacted 3 law firms to defend you. Richard hung up and went to the bathroom. He stared at his reflection in the stained mirror. The man staring back looked like a stranger. What was he doing? Helen had just proven, or had she? It could still be manipulation, he whispered to himself. She knows that if she helps me now, when I get everything back, I'll be eternally grateful. It's an emotional investment. But the voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. The pressure ramped up when Helen canceled her mother's private health insurance, switching her back to Medicaid. Richard learned about it through Matthew, who was still keeping tabs. Why would she do that? Richard asked, genuinely confused. To save money. The plan cost $2,000 a month. She said you need every penny right now. But her mom has Alzheimer's. She needs specialized care. She knows. She's visiting her mom twice a week now, personally, to make up for the lack of private aids. Richard felt nauseous. He was destroying not just Helen's life, but her innocent mother-in-law's too. And yet, Helen hadn't touched a dime of the $20,000 in the joint account. Not a cent. Instead, she found work. Private piano lessons 3 times a week, $50 an hour. She'd come home at 10 p.m., exhausted, with back pain from sitting on uncomfortable benches in students' homes. "You don't have to do this," Richard said on one of those nights. "Yes, I do. Every dollar helps. And besides," she smiled wearily, "it's good to get back to teaching. I forgot how rewarding it is to see a kid discover music." Patricia, following Richard's instructions, ramped up the attacks. She showed up at the apartment unannounced on a Saturday. "My God, Helen, how the mighty have fallen." Her gaze swept the room with barely disguised disgust. "Hi, Patricia. Want some coffee?" "No, thanks. I don't know where the water comes from around here." She turned to Richard. "Rick, I need to talk to you. Privately." They stepped into the hallway. Patricia didn't bother lowering her voice. "When are you going to wake up? She's putting on a show. All this saintly act, these little music lessons. It's all theater. She sold the jewelry to help me. Of course she did, because she knows when you get everything back. And you're smart. She'll get better jewels. It's an investment, Richard. She's investing in your gratitude. You don't know her. And do you? Really? Because from my experience, no one gives up luxury that easily. She's biding her time to bail and take half the assets in the divorce. There are no assets left to split. She doesn't know that." Patricia smiled cruelly. "The truth will come out, Rick. It always does. And when it does, don't come crying to me saying I didn't warn you." Helen didn't mention Patricia's visit, but Richard noticed she was quieter that night, lost in thoughts she didn't share. The test was working, but who was it torturing? If someone you love goes through a devastating crisis, how far would you go to help them? Is there a limit to sacrifice when love is true? The real horror began 6 weeks into the hoax. Helen woke to a call at 5 a.m. Richard pretended to still be asleep but watched as she answered with a sleepy voice. "Hello? Hi, Dr. Campbell." "What? Emergency. Panic flooded her voice. I'm coming right now. On my way. She dressed hurriedly, her hands shaking so much she couldn't fasten her jeans button. What happened? Richard asked, sitting up in bed. My mom. She had a stroke. She's in the ICU at Mount Sinai. Tears streamed down Helen's face. The doctor said, she might not make it without urgent surgery. I'll go with you. No. You have that meeting with the lawyer at 9. You can't miss it. I'll go alone. Richard felt a stab of guilt. There was no meeting. It was a lie. Everything was a lie. And now Helen's mother was genuinely ill. Or was she? He called Matthew as soon as Helen left. I need you to check if this stroke story is real. Richard, are you hearing yourself? You think she'd fake her own mother's illness? Just check, please. 3 hours later, Matthew called back. His voice was heavy. It's real. Mrs. Hayes had a massive ischemic stroke. Doctors give her 30% survival odds without surgery. With emergency surgery, it jumps to 70%. And how much does the surgery cost? $20,000. Private, because through Medicaid the waitlist is weeks. And she doesn't have weeks. Richard hung up and stood frozen in the middle of the tiny apartment. $20,000. Helen had access to a joint account with $20,000. All she had to do was transfer the money and save her mom. T would be the ultimate test. Matthew put 24/7 monitoring on the joint account. 24 hours passed. Helen didn't touch the money. 48 hours. Nothing. 72 hours, and the window for surgery was closing. Richard went to the hospital on the 3rd day. He found Helen in the ICU hallway, still in the same clothes from 2 days ago. She had deep dark circles and hands covered in small paper cuts. He'd later learn she'd been stuffing envelopes at a temp job to earn extra cash. How is she? He asked, sitting beside his wife. Stable. For now. Helen didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the ICU doors. But she needs the surgery. Soon. And the money? I'm getting it. Her voice was a weary whisper. I started a GoFundMe. Got $5,000 so far. Borrowed from some friends. Another $4,000. Still need $11,000. Helen. Richard took a deep breath. There's money in the joint account. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were red but dry. No more tears to cry. That money is ours. For your emergencies, for the lawyers, for our survival. I won't touch it without your permission. But your mom is dying. And you're facing a criminal investigation that could land you in prison. Richard, if we use that money now and you need it later to prove your innocence, I'd never forgive myself. My mom wouldn't want that. Richard was speechless. She was literally choosing to save him over her own mother. I'll get the money, Helen continued with broken determination. I took a gig playing keyboard at an Italian-American diner, buffet-style place over in Queens. They pay $200 a night, 6 nights a week. In a month, I have it. Your mom doesn't have a month. Then I'll work more. 2 jobs, 3. I'll get the money, Richard. One way or another. She stood up, her legs trembling from exhaustion and lack of food. I have to go. My shift at the diner starts at 6. Richard watched her leave, shuffling slowly down the hospital hallway like a woman 3 times her age. And for the first time since starting that monstrous hoax, he felt true shame. He called Matthew. How long until she raises the surgery money? At this rate? 3 weeks. But her mom doesn't have 3 weeks, Richard. The doctors were clear. So, what happens? Mrs. Hayes dies, and you'll have your answer. Helen loves you more than her own mother. Stop it. You need to stop. For God's sake, man, wake up. She's killing herself for you. For a crisis that doesn't even exist. Richard hung up. He sat in his car for 2 hours, unable to move. He needed to see Helen at the diner. Needed to see with his own eyes how far she'd go. The Bella Italia diner was a third-rate joint in Queens. Formica tables, poorly printed posters of Venice on the walls, the smell of reused fryer oil in the air. Richard arrived at 8 p.m. and sat in a dark corner. Helen was on a makeshift tiny stage playing keyboard. Cliché Italian tunes, some in English. Her back was hunched, her face a mask of professional focus. She wore a cheap black dress, clearly from a thrift store. And then Richard saw them. At a table near the stage, 3 women he recognized. Socialites from his old circle. Friends of Patricia. They whispered among themselves, staring at Helen, snapping photos with their phones. "That's Richard Harrington's wife, I'm sure of it," one said loud enough for everyone to hear. "The one who married him for the money. Look where she ended up now that the cash is gone." Laughter. More photos. One posted to Instagram right then with the caption, "How the mighty have fallen? From penthouse to pizza joint. Hashtag karma, hashtag fallen princess, hashtag money gone." Richard saw Helen notice the women. Saw the flush creep up her neck, the humiliation flickering in her eyes. But she kept playing. Didn't stop. Didn't run. Kept playing that cheesy Italian tune while silent tears ran down her face. When her shift ended at 11 p.m., Helen got her $200 from the manager. A burly guy with beer breath who looked at her with a mix of pity and lechery. "Next week, maybe play something more upbeat," he said, standing too close. "Folks like it when you smile more." "Sure, Mr. Anthony. Whatever you want." Richard watched it all from hiding. Watched Helen fold the money carefully and tuck it into an old wallet. Watched her walk to the bus stop because she couldn't afford an Uber. Watched her wait alone in the cold night, clutching her purse to her chest, vulnerable and broken. And he knew he'd gone too far. He drove home, arriving before her. When Helen entered the apartment, it was midnight. She was exhausted, smelling of diner grease, her feet swollen from 6 hours in high heels. "How was it?" Richard asked. "Good. Got the 200. She tried to smile but had no energy left. Just another 11,000 to go. She headed to the bathroom. Richard heard the shower turn on, and heard the sobs. Great, ragged sobs from the depths of a shattered soul. Matthew appeared at the door 20 minutes later. They'd planned to meet. "We need to talk," the lawyer said, entering without ceremony. "About Helen." "What?" "She knows." The world stopped. "What do you mean she knows?" "The test. She knows everything. For 2 weeks. That's impossible." Matthew sighed, looking a decade older. "One of the actors we hired to play the federal agent had a crisis of conscience. She spilled everything to Helen in a chance encounter at the grocery store. The woman felt guilty for being part of something so cruel. When was this?" 15 days ago, before your mother-in-law's stroke." Richard sank heavily into a chair. "So, all this time, she knew it was a test?" "Yes, and she kept going anyway, even knowing you were lying, that you had money to save her mom. She didn't touch the joint account. She came to me, crying, begging me not to tell you she knew." "Why?" "Because..." Matthew paused, his voice choked. "She said if you needed this proof, she'd give it. Because when you truly love someone, you heal their wounds, not create more." Those were her exact words. The shower was still running. The sobs had stopped, just the sound of falling water. Richard covered his face with his hands. "What have I done? God, what have I done?" "Her mom is dying, Richard. Dying for real. And she's playing keyboard in a dive bar getting humiliated by socialites knowing you have millions in the bank. Because she loves you so much she's willing to let her own mother die to give you the peace of mind you need. I need to tell her. Now. Not now. Her mom needs the surgery first. Save Mrs. Hayes. Then you face what you've done." Richard nodded, unable to speak. Matthew left, and he sat there, in the tiny apartment that was a monument to his own cruelty, listening to Helen cry in the shower. For the first time in 10 years, since Beatrice left him, Richard cried too. Is there forgiveness for someone who hurts the one they love in the name of their own fear? When love becomes a test, does it still deserve to be called love? Dawn arrived like a verdict. Richard hadn't slept. He'd sat on the old couch, staring at his phone, at the bank balances proving it was all a lie. 200 million. He had 200 million while Helen sold jewelry. worked in cheap diners, watched her mother fade. Helen emerged from the bedroom at 6 a.m. She had deep dark circles but was dressed to leave. "I'm going to the hospital to see Mom before work," she said, her voice neutral. "Back this afternoon." "Helen, wait." She stopped at the door, her back to him. She didn't turn. "I know everything." Silence. Then, "Know what?" "That you found out. That you know it's a test. Matthew told me." She finally turned. There was no surprise on her face, just infinite weariness. "And now? Did you get what you wanted? The proof you needed?" "Helen. Because I passed, you know?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "I passed your cruel test. I proved I love you more than money, more than comfort, more than—" Her voice broke. "More than my own mother's life. Congratulations, Richard. You win. I didn't want." "Didn't want what? To see me suffer? To humiliate me? To see how far I'd go before breaking?" The tears finally came, not from sadness, but from rage. "You tested me like I was a used car, Richard. Like love needs a certificate of authenticity. I was afraid. And I was afraid too," she shouted. She'd never shouted before. "Afraid I wasn't enough. Afraid I couldn't make you happy. Afraid you'd always compare me to her, to Beatrice. But you know the difference between us? I chose to trust. I chose to believe. And you chose to destroy me to feed your paranoia." Richard took a step toward her. Helen recoiled. "No, don't touch me now. Not while I'm still pretending." She wiped the tears angrily. "Because that's what I'm doing, right? Still in your little play. You want to see how long I can hold out. It's over. The test is over. Your mom gets the surgery today. Now, I already called the top surgeons in the country. They're heading to the hospital right now." Helen froze. "You? What?" "It was all a lie. I never lost anything. I have money, Helen. A lot of money. And your mom will get the best surgery possible because I was an idiot, a monster. But I won't let her die because of my madness." She staggered, steadying herself against the wall. You had money this whole time? While my mom?" "I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. I know nothing ever will be. But—" The slap came fast and hard. Helen's hand left a red mark on Richard's cheek. "You owe me more than apologies," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You owe me explanations. You owe me on your knees. Because what you did, I don't know if there's forgiveness for that." She grabbed her purse and left, slamming the door. Richard stood there, his cheek burning, knowing he deserved far more than a slap. He arrived at the hospital an hour later. The ICU hallway buzzed, 3 renowned surgeons, a full team mobilized. Matthew was there, coordinating. "She's in surgery," he said when he saw Richard. "Mrs. Hayes. Odds now are 95% for full recovery. And Helen, in the chapel. Won't talk to anyone." Richard went to the small hospital chapel. Helen was in the front row on her knees, praying. Or maybe just pretending to pray for a moment of peace. He sat beside her, didn't speak, just stayed there. After long minutes, Helen whispered, "Why? Just tell me why." "Because Beatrice destroyed me, and I never got over it. Never trusted again. Every time you said you loved me, I heard her saying the same thing before abandoning me. I'm not her. I know. I always knew deep down. But the fear." He took a deep breath. "The fear was bigger than reason. You hired a private investigator before we got married," Helen said. "It wasn't a question." Richard froze. "How did you?" "I found the reports a year ago, in your office drawer behind the company files. You had me investigated for 6 months before proposing." "Helen, At the time I was hurt, but I thought, he was wounded before. It's natural to be cautious. I forgave because I loved you. But this," she gestured vaguely, "this went beyond caution. It was premeditated cruelty." "You're right. And your sister? Was Patricia involved?" "Not directly, but she fed my doubts, planted seeds." Helen laughed without humor. "Of course, she always hated me, and you gave her the power to destroy our marriage. A doctor entered the chapel. Mr. Harrington? Surgery's underway. Going well. You can watch from the observation room if you'd like. Helen stood immediately, followed the doctor without looking back. Richard stayed in the chapel, alone with his sins. The surgery lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the lead surgeon found Helen in the hallway. Complete success. Your mom will recover fully. A few weeks of physical therapy and she'll be back to normal. Helen collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Richard tried to hug her, but she pushed him away. No, you don't have the right. Not now. Patricia arrived an hour later. Matthew had called her, per Richard's instructions. She swept into the hospital in her designer suit and heels, looking for her brother. Found Richard and Helen in the ICU hallway. The tension between them was palpable. Rick, what's going on? Matthew said it was urgent and... She stopped, seeing Richard's expression. What? You need to apologize to Helen. What? I didn't... Now, Patricia, you've spent years poisoning my mind against her, feeding my paranoia, sowing doubts, and I was dumb enough to listen. Richard, I was just trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From someone who truly loves me? From someone who'd prove that love in every way possible while you only see the worst in people. Patricia looked at Helen, who watched silently. You told him about... She didn't tell me anything, Richard cut in. Because unlike you, Helen isn't driven by revenge or malice. But I know, Patricia, I know the things you said, the lies you spread. They weren't lies. I was right to be suspicious. You were wrong. Matthew's voice came from behind her. Dead wrong. And now everyone will know. He pulled out his phone and showed a screen. Remember the charity gala? Where you set up to publicly humiliate Helen. You recorded it, thinking you'd post on social media and expose her as a gold digger. So what? So I leaked the video, the full one, including the behind the scenes where you laugh about her with your friends, call her a cheap opportunist, plan the whole humiliation. It's got 500,000 views already. The comments aren't kind to you. Patricia paled. She grabbed her own phone. Her messages were exploding. Client emails canceling contracts. Social media in outrage. Headlines: Top lawyer exposed for humiliating sister-in-law during crisis. You wouldn't do this to me, she whispered to her brother. I did, because you never understood, Patricia. You mistook protection for control, brotherly love for possession. Helen gave me something you never could, the freedom to be vulnerable and still loved. Patricia looked at Helen, then at Richard. You're going to ruin me over this? No. Helen spoke for the first time. Her voice was tired but steady. You ruined yourself. With your bitterness, your cynicism, your inability to believe true love exists. Pity you, Patricia. It must be lonely living in a world where everyone is suspect. I don't need your pity. Maybe not. But you need help. Therapy. Someone to teach you not everyone has ulterior motives. Helen stood. I'm exhausted. I'm staying with my mom. Richard, you don't need to stay. She entered the ICU, leaving the three in the hallway. Patricia looked at her brother. You really think she'll forgive you? After all this? I don't know. Maybe not. And I deserve it. And if she doesn't, then I'll learn to live with the consequences of my actions. Like you should. Patricia left without another word. Her life, so carefully built on judgments and suspicions, was crumbling. And for the first time, she had no one to blame but herself. Can the distrust that wounds those we love be healed? Or are some damages irreversible, turning love into permanent resentment? Mrs. Hayes woke 3 days after surgery. Her first word was Helen, slurred but clear. The second was Richard, when she saw him sitting across the room. I'm here, Mom. Helen held the frail woman's hand. You're okay. You had the surgery. You'll be fine. Mrs. Hayes's eyes, still cloudy from anesthesia, focused on Richard. Then, with surprising strength, she squeezed Helen's hand and pulled her daughter close, away from him. She knew. Even through a stroke, even unconscious for the worst of it, she knew something was wrong between the couple. Richard left the room. He went to the parking lot, sat in his car, and finally let the full weight of what he'd done consume him. He'd destroyed 3 years of marriage, nearly killed his mother-in-law, publicly humiliated the woman he loved. And for what? To prove something that never needed proving. Matthew knocked on the car window. "I need to show you something," he said when Richard opened the door. They went to a cafe near the hospital. Matthew opened his laptop and turned the screen. "Remember Helen's GoFundMe for her mom's surgery? Yeah. Look who donated." Richard read the names. Former students from the public school where she'd taught. Kids who'd grown up, gotten modest jobs, and donated $5, $10, $20. Attached messages. "Mrs. Hayes taught me to love music when I thought it wasn't for kids like me. I'll never forget when she bought my school uniform out of her own paycheck. She deserves all the good in the world." There were hundreds, thousands, people Helen had touched over the years, proving her kindness wasn't a performance for Richard, but the essence of who she was. "You tested the wrong person, my friend," Matthew said gently. "It was never her who needed to prove anything. It was you." Richard returned to the hospital, found Helen in the cafeteria, sipping terrible coffee and staring into space. "Can I sit?" She nodded vaguely. He sat. "I saw the GoFundMe, the messages." "Oh," she didn't seem surprised. "Good people. My students were always good people." "Helen, No," she interrupted. "No more apologies. Apologies are for when you accidentally step on someone's foot. What you did was deliberate, calculated, cruel. Apologies don't cover that." "Then what does?" She finally looked at him. "Honesty, truth, a real explanation, not rehearsed excuses. I want to understand, Richard. I want to understand how the man who proposed to me in tears, saying I was the best thing that ever happened to him, could turn into someone capable of putting me through all this." Richard took a deep breath. "I'll tell you a story about the day Beatrice left me." And he told her about coming home that day after a devastating meeting where he'd lost his company's biggest deal, about finding Beatrice packing, how she'd said coldly she hadn't signed up to be the wife of a loser, about being alone in that empty apartment, having a panic attack so severe he thought he'd die, about spending 3 months unable to sleep properly, flashing back every time he saw a happy couple. "I rebuilt my life from nothing," he said, "made a fortune again, bigger than before. But that fear, that terror that love was conditional on financial success, it never left. It stayed. An open wound I covered but never healed. And when you met me, when I met you, for the first time in 10 years, I felt hope. You were different, had substance, values. But the more I loved you, the more the fear grew that it was temporary. That when you really knew me, you'd see the scared man under the successful executive and run too. So you decided to test if I'd run." "Yes, and in the process, I became exactly what I feared most. Someone unworthy of love." Helen was silent for a long time. Then, "Did you seek help? Therapy? Anything to deal with that trauma?" "No. I thought I could handle it alone. And look where that got us." She sighed. "Richard, I love you. I still love you, which is both a blessing and a curse right now. But love isn't enough when there's so much broken between us. I know. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I want to, because forgiving feels like invalidating all the suffering I went through, all the humiliation, all the fear. You don't have to forgive me, but I want you to forgive yourself," she said, taking his hand. "Because carrying that guilt, you'll become as bitter as your sister. And I don't want that for you, even if I don't want to be by your side anymore. Do you want a divorce? I don't know what I want, except for my mom to be okay." She stood. "I need time, Richard. A lot of time. And space. And you need professional help. I won't be with someone who doesn't work on their demons. I'll find a therapist. Today." "Good. It's a start." She looked at him for a long moment. "The man who proposed to me 3 years ago, the one who cried telling me about his tough childhood, About going hungry at 9. Does that man still exist? I want to believe he does. Then find him, because that's the man I fell in love with. Not the successful executive or the paranoid millionaire. The vulnerable man who had the courage to show his scars. She touched his face gently. That's the man I might, one day, be able to forgive. She left the cafeteria, leaving Richard alone with his cold coffee and burning revelations. 3 weeks passed. Mrs. Hayes was discharged and went to a luxury assisted living facility that Richard insisted on paying for. This time, Helen accepted, but only as a loan she'd repay when she could. Richard started therapy 3 times a week. Intense sessions where he finally confronted the trauma of Beatrice, his father's early death, the years of childhood poverty that left him obsessed with financial security. Helen moved back to her old Brooklyn apartment, the real one she'd rented before marrying. She said she needed space to think. Richard respected it, though it hurt to see her suitcases leave the penthouse. Patricia sought help too. After the public exposure, she lost half her clients and got a forced mirror into who she'd become. She started therapy, was diagnosed with attachment issues and control anxiety. She sent Helen a letter, not asking forgiveness yet, but acknowledging the damage. It's a start, Helen commented when she showed the letter to Richard during one of their weekly reconnection talks. Meetings suggested by his therapist. You're too generous, Richard said. No, just realistic. Wounds need time to heal. Hers, ours. It was during one of those talks, 6 months after the disaster, that Richard made a proposal. I want to start a foundation for families in financial crisis. Help them access resources, therapy, support. And I want you to run it. Helen was surprised. Why? Because you know what crisis feels like. What it's like to need help and not get it. And because... He hesitated. Because I need to turn this horrible experience into something positive. Or it was all for nothing. And if I say no, then I respect it. But I hope you'll consider. She thought for 3 days. Then accepted, with one condition. Matthew works with me. He was complicit in the test, but he came around in the end. He deserves a shot at redemption too. The Fresh Start Foundation launched a year after the test. Matthew quit Richard's firm to work there full-time. I need to do something that matters, he said. Before it's too late. The first family helped was that of one of the kids Helen had taught in public school. Full circle. Richard and Helen didn't move in together again. Not yet, but they had dinner twice a week. Talked daily. Rebuilt brick by brick the trust that had been dynamited. Would have exploded in other ways. Worse, maybe. Now we know exactly what needs fixing. You think we can fix it? I don't know, but I'm willing to try. You, more than anything. She smiled. That smile that had won him over 3 years ago. But now it held wisdom, scars, history. 2 years after the test, Richard and Helen renewed their vows. Not in a fancy church or expensive ballroom. At the public school where she taught, with the kids singing songs she taught them. It was a simple ceremony. Mrs. Hayes, fully recovered, sat in the front row, crying tears of joy. Matthew was best man. Patricia wasn't invited, but she sent flowers, white hydrangeas, Helen's favorites, with a card. Thank you for teaching me forgiveness exists. One day, I hope to deserve it fully. At the makeshift altar, the officiant asked Richard, do you take Helen as your wife? In wealth and in poverty? Richard smiled, tears in his eyes. We've already proven the poverty or its simulation. Now I want to prove it in true wealth. Wealth of trust, Ted with kids in the garden. I learned that truly loving means being vulnerable. And vulnerability, for a man who'd spent years building armor, is the scariest and most liberating thing in the world. The interviewer smiled. And has your wife fully forgiven you? Fully? I don't know. There are days I see the hurt flash in her eyes when something reminds her of that time. Nights she still cries, processing the trauma. Forgiveness isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process, a daily choice. But are you happy? Richard thought. We're real. And in reality, we've built something stronger than the fantasy I had before. because now I know her love survived my worst. And that, strangely, gives me the trust one sought the wrong way. That night at home, they'd finally moved back in together to a mid-sized apartment, neither the luxury penthouse nor the Brooklyn shoebox. Helen found Richard looking at old photos. "What are you missing?" she asked. "Nothing. Just thinking how blind I was." "We all are, sometimes." "You never were." "Not true. I was blind to how much you were suffering. If I'd noticed sooner, maybe nothing. I hid it well. I was a pro at hiding." He pulled her onto his lap. "But not anymore. No secrets, no tests.